Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Santita Jackson Show on AM 950 Radio, the voice of progressive Minnesota. It's a joy to be with you today. We're actually taping just after, while people are in the midst of the eclipse. Some people are reaching totality right now, and so we send them God's blessings in this moment. To have a very special moment, we have Robert Lewis from the Cherokee Nation, from Cherokee National Treasure, actually, to give us a view, multiple views of what Indigenous people, how they view this. We are on their land. We share this land, but it is their land. And I think it's important for us to listen to their voices today. But I also, as we talk about the Middle East, as my brother beloved Matthew Ho is on his way to deliver aid to our brothers and sisters who are suffering in the Middle East. Of course, this distinguished veteran who is the associate director of the Eisenhower Media Network, I cannot wait to hear from him because he is on his way to be a part of really rescuing people, even if it's at a distance, Matthew Ho. It's important that we do this. Many people have said that if we can resolve this Mideast crisis, we can resolve anything in the world, and I believe that. But of course, he's been on many iterations of our shows, former Marine captain, Afghanistan State Department officer. He's a disabled Iraq war vet, and he's a man of peace. And of course, we have attorney Mark Fancher, brilliant author and opinion writer, thinker from the National Conference of Black Lawyers. But let us bring from the Cherokee National Treasure, our own treasure, Robert Lewis. Robert Lewis, how are you today?
I'm good. Thank you for asking.
Thank
OCO
you,
to everybody.
Tokyo. And that is the greeting from the Cherokee Nation, yes?
Yes, that's hello in Cherokee.
Okay. Tell me, what have we just witnessed?
An eclipse that was going across the Oklahoma not too long ago. And for the Cherokee Nation, for the Cherokee tribal people, the sun and the moon, they have relationships with it, especially the moon. There's phases of the moon that correlate with aspects of hunting and gathering that we did traditionally. Now, the story I'm going to tell you about the moon and the sun and the eclipse, it's not really a traditional story. It's probably around the 1800s. It's based upon a James Mooney book. And he would have gone out and interviewed Cherokees. And the reason I can say that is because it talks about firearms. It talks about pots and pans. And traditionally, we did not have a firearm. We did not have pots and pans. We did our hunting with bows and arrows or blowguns and trapping with fishing and flint knapping skills, and also had to go out there and make our own pottery. So when it talks about things like firearms and pots and pans, you know that's after contact, after we had contact with the Europeans. And I'd like to thank you for acknowledging the fact that indigenous people consider this area as part of this land as belonging to the tribal people in this area. When I bring that out to area schools, I remind them, says, all of you are already fluent in a foreign language. If you can read, write, and understand English, you're fluent in a foreign language, because England is nowhere near the United States. So all of you are fluent already in a foreign language. So if anybody ever asks you, can you speak a foreign language? You say, I speak fluent English. And you can say,
Absolutely.
so, but as tribal people, the Cherokees talked about this. They said a giant frog would show up, since the frog is a nocturnal animal associated with the moon and phases of the moon. So the frog was trying to swallow the sun. And so the Cherokees came out and began to shoot off firearms and guns and make a lot of noise and rattles and beat on drums and anything they could do to try to scare away the frog, so they would help the sun survive. I am Cherokee, Navajo, and Apache. Now, the Cherokee side would have done that. The Navajo and the Apache, they consider this a reverence to spiritual things that are happening. Yebushe, holy ones, what's going on. And so for the Navajos and the Apaches, that side is they go inside their houses, their hoguns, and they sit and they reflect with prayers. Like you talked about your great grandmother, reflect with prayer. Everything should shut down and you pray and you think about things and be with family. And so you sit there and you're holding reverence for what's going on, because these are cosmic forces that are happening outside. And Navajos believe it's a death and a rebirth. Basically, it's the death of the sun and the sun being reborn. And since death is such something that is so life-changing for them, it's considered something that you don't watch, you don't look at. And for Apaches, it's like the ring of fire. The sun is fighting to stay alive, to keep us alive. And so these creative forces are going on out there. So we come inside and we say prayers and thankfulness, but we stay as still as we can, so that for the most part, we're letting the cosmic forces play out while we stay inside and basically treat it with respect.
What are we missing something now? Because it seems like this event has become spectacle. And
there's a spectacle aspect.
Yeah.
There is a spectacle aspect to it.
Okay.
And for tribal people, it's more along the lines of reverence. Some people, because I'm Cherokee, Navajo, and Apache, one side can sit there and go out there and make noise and try to scare away the frog. The other one's wanting to be respectful of what's going on and just kind of go off in the distance. So when we had this event happening today, and me, I'm a storyteller for the Cherokee Nation, they asked me to come out and do stories. I went out there and I did it, but I explained to them, I'm also Navajo and Apache. Part of me says I shouldn't be out here. I shouldn't be sitting out here. And they were respectful for that. And they said, oh, we understand. So instead of putting me right in the dead center, because they were going to have me right at the epicenter when it was darkest in an area and with the children and everything, I was allowed to go early on. I was allowed to tell the story about the frog. And then after I finished telling the story about the frog, I left and I went off to go and do what I was supposed to do amongst the Navajos. Go and sit there, and you don't eat, you don't drink anything. For the most part, you're sitting there, and as a Navajo person, you're basically in prayer. You're thinking about the aspects of what's happening outside.
How could we get it right? What lessons would you like to impart to the rest of the world about this moment? What should we be doing in your estimation?
Reflection upon the earth, reflection upon each other. There are so many problems that are going on with the world today. People that cannot communicate. People seem to have trouble relating to each other. There's problems between aspects of racial tensions. There's problems of religious disagreements. There's problems along those lines. Gender issues. All of these things are happening right now amongst peoples. And so we should remember that at one time, all of us had to depend upon each other. At one time, the tribal nations were small collective groups of people who lived together and had to depend on each other. You might at one time have seen maybe 100 people in your lifetime, maybe 200 people in your lifetime, maybe 400 or 500 in your lifetime. This is long before European contact. And because of that, you had to physically and emotionally and spiritually depend upon the person next to you. It's an awful lot like along the lines of the military, where they start there and they depend on the person next to them. They have to depend on the person next to them. That person watches your back. You watch their back. You take care of that person. And so as a tribal people, especially amongst the Cherokees and Navajos, we're taught that our women are the focal and the key part of this. They're the ones that help bring life into the world. They're the ones that help nurture it. And without them, the continuation of our tribal people, our tribal beliefs, cannot go on without the help of our women, our grandmothers, our great-grandmothers, all of them. These strong women are basically helping all of us to take care of each other as a tribal people. So as a people out there, when you're out there encountering other people, there's some people you may not have a connection with, you may have trouble with, you may have problems with them. You still should try to treat them with as much respect as you can. Hopefully this respectfulness that you're showing can be show them that what they're doing may not be working, and they should also try to find a common ground for you.
Robert Lewis, I think that is something that can be applied to all of us. And I see you, Mark Fancher, this is resonating with you and with Matthew. Before Robert Lewis goes, Mark Fancher, you never start off any critique of the United States without first mentioning the indigenous people. Why did this resonate with you today?
Just simply acknowledging. I think that it's so easy for this country to completely forget that we're sitting on stolen territory. And it's not that it's just stolen territory, but it was territory that sustained advanced civilizations with highly advanced cultures, beautiful concepts and ideas, a wonderful and beautiful relationship with God Almighty. And it's not that this was, as the lawyers say, terra nullius, land occupied by nobody. We didn't just take land. we destroyed just so much, and even the least little acknowledgement and remembrance of what was a casualty, I guess, of this settler colony is an important thing as far as I'm concerned.
Matthew, as you embark on this rescue mission, what does this message mean to you?
Well, thank you, Robert, for your words there. I wrote down your remarks about how we relate to one another, and you could see both. I could in the moment when you were saying that, I was thinking how that can be both a positive and a negative thing. And so we're going to talk about what's occurring in Gaza and how our relationship with one another, how we can either harm or we can help each other. It's all up to the choices we make. And that extends, of course, as individuals, as communities, and then as nations. But certainly, I think prefacing our conversation with Gaza, Santita, with this conversation about the eclipse and what that means in the larger context, I think was really helpful for me to kind of give a good perspective as to how I want to address this.
Well, I thank you. And that's why I wanted Robert Lewis on with us today. I reached out to Kim Teehee, who by all rights should be a sitting member of Congress. It has been mandated that Indigenous people have seats in Congress, and she should be seated. And we should never, ever forget that. She is not seated because the body has not allowed her to be seated. She should be Congresswoman Kim Teehee. They need their representation in Congress, and they need it now. And we need to acknowledge all that this legacy of Indigenous peoples of the Americas have given to us, and including how to live. Robert Lewis, is there any final thing that you would like to say? Oh, the most wonderful things are said on mute. Robert, are you still there?
There I am.
No.
Technology. Yes, technology is such a fun thing to have to deal with.
It is. I'm trying to get it myself.
Yeah, it can sit there and it can sneak up on you and bite you.
Yes.
And, so when I go out to area schools and communities and we talk about the aspects of storytelling, some people will sit there and it says, what does a story have to do with basically teaching children? So stories are indicative of every culture. It's not just natives, it's every culture across the world have stories. And these stories can inspire, can infuse you. These stories can motivate you to be a better person, to be someone who can take control of aspects in their life that they may not have felt they had any type of control over. And because of this, when I do these storytelling sessions, and what I normally do is I pull children out and involve them in the story. I give them aspects of it being a bear or a wolf or eagle or deer or frog or a turtle. And we go through these stories. These stories, some of them are so old, we don't know how old they are. But when I get to the end of the story, I ask them when I finish it, what did you learn from that story? And they sit there and they tell me, says they learn there's respect for their elders, respect for each other. Sometimes they tell me the funny part of the story, and I said, yep, the story's funny, but there's a core point. There's a core aspect to each one of these stories. And not just Cherokee, but all the Native tribes and everybody's culture out there has a story. There's a core aspect of it that teaches you to try to be the best human being you can possibly be and treat each other with a great amount of respect and love we all deserve.
Robert Lewis, Cherokee National Treasure. Indeed, you are that. I cannot wait to have you back on the show.
Well, thank you.
May God bless you, and give my love to Chief Hoskin and to Congresswoman to be seated, Kim Teehee.
I will. Thank you all for having me. I appreciate it.
Oh, you're home here. You got to come back.
I will.
God bless you. Thank you.
Maybe I'll figure out how to work the camera.
No, hey, don't worry about it. As long as I got your voice, we are good. We are good. AM 950 Radio family is grateful to have you as the Santita Jackson Show, sending you so much love.
Thank you.
We are talking about Gaza today. I mean, it is on everyone's minds. Of course, it has been amplified by the World Central Kitchen workers. 7 of them were killed. 1 Palestinian, 6 Westerners, 6 white people, if you will, who many people are saying that maybe that is why uh, this story is getting so much attention. But I have even another take on that. These are people, human beings, who saw other human beings in trouble and they decided to go to help them. And they knew that they were putting their lives on the line. Did they expect to die? Did not die, but be killed? They hoped that they wouldn't, but they were willing to do it. When you travel through those areas, Matthew Ho, as you well know, you give the military your coordinates because you're in a war zone so that you can get clearance. I mean, I've been with the Reverend Jackson, Jesse Jackson, when that has happened for us. And when we've had those coordinates, whether we were flying or on the ground, you would get particular clearance, and sometimes you get a military escort. This didn't work for them, and it was a particularly cruel killing.
Mm-hmm.
A 3-car convoy. The drone surgically struck the first one. Car number 2 pulls the victims out. Then that car was struck just a few minutes later. Then car number 3 pulls those persons out, and then that car was struck. The world has been, and European leadership, and people all over the world, but in the global South, we have known that this has been going on. Everyone has been appalled by what has happened. And so now you have more and more people who are, and I think more than 200 AIDS workers have been killed. Now you are heading in that direction yourself, not directly into Gaza, but that is what you're doing. It's an international effort. Matthew Ho, talk to us.
Thanks, Santita. So I'm part of International Civilian Aid Flotilla to break the siege of Gaza. And this is the latest iteration of the Freedom Flotilla Coalition, which many of your listeners may be familiar with, that has been attempting to break the blockade or the siege of Gaza since 2008. So people may be familiar with these ships that at times, almost annually, have tried to enter Gaza to bring much needed relief over the last 15 years or so. And they have been met continually by the Israelis, including in 2010 when Israeli naval commandos killed 10 of the participants in that mission. But this mission is an emergency mission, is a flotilla of ships representing with members and participants from 12 different countries. And we have more than 5,500 tons of cargo. So 5,500 tons of assistance that the people of Gaza desperately need. So people to give an idea of how big 5,500 tons is, the barge, the ship that the World Central Kitchen had brought to Gaza was 200 tons. And so we're going to try and enter with 5,500 tons. And certainly with World Central Kitchen, with Arena, with other aid organizations pulling out of Gaza, with the dismantling of UNRWA, the United Nations Works and Relief Agency, which is the primary aid provider to Gaza, as well as the occupied Palestinian territories of East Jerusalem and West Bank, with the dismantling of UNRWA by the defunding of it by the United States, the UK, Germany, and others, we see our ability to bring this 5,500 tons of aid to the Palestinian people as crucial and incredibly urgent, because they are being a deliberate starvation campaign has been enacted against them as part of the wider genocidal campaign of ethnic cleansing that Israel's been conducting in Gaza since October.
Well, what do you make of this apparent military drawdown? Apparently, President Biden and Prime Minister Netanyahu had a contentious call. I read the readout from it that has been published. That is, the transcript of the call. And apparently there's been some movement. I don't know exactly what is going on behind it, but because there are so many different stories in politics. There are a lot of layers to this, but you're seeing the IDF withdraw from different places in Gaza now. I mean, the world has really reacted quite strongly to these killings.
I think various messages are being attached to this, Santita, for different political purposes. So there are those who are going to claim that this is the result of Joe Biden talking tough to Benjamin Netanyahu. I don't think that's the case at all. at all. I think this is the Israeli army has concluded its operations in Khan Yunis, in that southern third, the part of Gaza right north of Rafah. They have concluded their operations there. They have more or less destroyed the city. And initial reports coming out are that 80% of the city has been destroyed. 80% of the buildings gone. The thousands and thousands of people buried under the rubble. It's unknown how many are dead, but all the reports coming out say that there is an overpowering stench of death from all the bodies beneath all those collapsed buildings. And so the Israeli army has finished its mission in Khan Yunis, and now they are repositioning to conduct that mission again in Rafah, the last city that is still standing in Gaza, where there are about 1.4 million refugees right now. And we know that this is likely the case because this is what the Israelis themselves have said. The Israeli defense minister saying, Yoav Gallant, saying that we are repositioning so that we can begin operations against Rafah.
Attorney Mark Fancher, your reaction? I mean, some people the corporate media are painting this Matthew Ho and Attorney Fancher as, maybe a cessation in hostility. But I tend to agree with you, Matthew Ho. I mean, and you're the military expert here, the veteran. I said, no, there's something else going on here. Because actually, I think that even former President Trump's remarks have been misrepresented. They said he said finish the job. No, if you read the whole interview, he said this is a PR disaster for you, which is what other people who are friendly with Israel have said. He said, you got to stop this. People watching buildings collapse on people. This is not working. Whatever you need to do, finish it and get out. You've got to stop. And I'm no Trump apologist, but this puts him to the left, if you will, of President Biden. Not that that's saying a whole lot. But Attorney Mark Fancher, what do you make of what's happening over there now?
I think there are several things that are going on at once with the players trying to navigate a very tricky kind of a situation. I think Matthew Ho is absolutely correct in terms of what Israel and the Israeli Defense Force, what they're doing and what their plan is. But from the United States side, I think that from the beginning, it has never been a question about whether the U.S. could participate in this in a way that would lead to a humanitarian outcome, a peaceful outcome, or anything of the sort. It has always been about the empire using Israel and its military to accomplish objectives that the empire wants to see achieved in that region. This is all dirty work. It's nasty work. It's filthy work that the United States could never attach itself to. And the empire has been more than thrilled to see this genocide carried out, because it's something they could never do, and it's being done so well and so effectively. But I think that it has, at a certain point, become counterproductive. The U.S. has to maintain its image of being the bastion of democracy, the voice of reason, the positive force in the world. And the longer it remains attached to this, the more its image is tarnished. And so it has had to strategically make moves to try and to salvage its reputation, and to, at the same time, continue with the program that the Israeli government has embarked on. And I think that the way that they're doing that is they're trying to very quietly divorce themselves away from Israel, while simultaneously establishing relationships with other forces, governments, and in the region that would be sympathetic and cooperative with their program once they get through this phase of it. And I think that part of the so-called riot act that Biden read to Netanyahu may have, by implication, if not expressly, communicated the idea that we're starting to pull away from you, you're going to eventually be left on your own. And to the extent that Israel could somehow continue its program, and at the same time look as though it is in some ways making concessions, it is in some ways moderating its efforts, that's to their advantage. So I think that it's kind of a very delicate kind of a game that they're all playing, uh, and the objective of their game is not a good one for anybody who is a well-meaning or humanitarian person. And I think that there are no sides to choose here as between those players. I mean, the only side to choose is the people, the side of the people who are the victims. But we can't say that the Israeli government is right or the United States government is right. They're all part and parcel of the machinery of the empire, and the entire empire needs to be destroyed.
Who is going with you in this international effort, Matthew Ho?
So I'm going in an administrative capacity, so I'm not going on the votes. But we have the coalition is made up of 12 separate nations, and people can find out information about this by Googling Freedom Flotilla Coalition or by Googling U.S. boats to Gaza. And you'll see all the information there about past missions, the purposes of the mission, who makes up this. But there's 12 different nations, and the expectation is that we'll have several hundred participants. So in addition to the 5,500 tons of cargo, we will have several hundred people from across the globe who have been compelled to take this mission on. In acknowledging the very severe risks, acknowledging the very real danger involved with this. No one is, going into this cavalierly, but they are so compelled by what they are witnessing, watching this genocide occur with the full support of our government, if they're Americans and if they're Western Europeans, certainly with the support of their government. And also, I should say one aspect too is, one, we believe we are justified in doing this because of the dictates of moral or natural law. This is the right thing to do. But also under international law, we believe we are. We are correct in doing this. And most recently, with the decision from the International Court of Justice in January declaring that genocide was very plausible to be occurring in Gaza, and by the International Court of Justice ordering all efforts be made to stop the genocide and provide humanitarian assistance, we see that as an order that we are following in attempting to break the siege of Gaza and deliver this aid. So in that group of several hundred who are going, we have a lot of technical capabilities, technical backgrounds as well, healthcare workers, engineers, etc., people who will be of great assistance to the people of Gaza once they are ashore.
There is risk, and there's risk in everything, but there is risk here because, what happened with the World Central Kitchen? It is clear it was not an accident, and it was a targeted killing, and I think it was meant to chill efforts like yours. So how do you proceed?
Well, I mean, and that's one of the things too, is that, as you said, Santita, the people from World Central Kitchen, those 7 aid workers were coordinating. They were working. The overall organization, the institution, World Central Kitchen, had been coordinating and working with the Israelis, and they were still deliberately targeted and killed. We, the International Civilian Aid Flotilla, is not working with the Israelis. We are not complying with them. We will not be coordinating with them. Israel is in violation of international law. They have no right. They have no jurisdiction. You can point out all the different ways why we should not be working with them, and we are not working with them. Again, international law is behind us. The international community is behind us, and so we call upon the international community to provide that support and call upon their nations to put pressure on Israel, not just to support our mission, to allow it in, but also to end their siege, end the blockade, and the assistance needed into Gaza, as well as, of course, end their overall genocidal campaign.
Well, before we introduce Phyllis Bennett from the Institute for Policy Studies into this discussion, Attorney Mark Fancher, legally, this all makes sense. What Matthew Ho is saying absolutely makes sense. And but these have been like extrajudicial killings, if you will, Matthew. I mean, they have kill zones. It seems like all of Gaza. And quite frankly, wherever you have freedom fighters for the Palestinians, those are kill zones.
Right. And we've seen for the last 6 months that Israel has more or less implemented a policy for their ground troops of kill anything that moves. And then we've also seen through a lot of great journalism that has come out of Israel in particular, that Israeli policies at the command level, so whether at unit command levels, the campaign command levels, or at the national command levels in Tel Aviv, have dictated policies of deliberately targeting certain groups, such as aid workers, such as journalists, such as poets and academics and teachers, right? But we've also seen through their use of artificial intelligence, the ability to target and punish the families, the neighbors, the communities of those that Israel believe are connected to Hamas. So we've seen this deliberate targeting campaign by Israel that is both a form of collective punishment. We are going to punish you for being associated with Hamas because we say so, but also, too, we are deliberately targeting you because you are a link. This gets back to what Robert was talking about us all being interconnected, about how we all depend upon one another. And one of the things you do if you're doing an ethnic cleansing campaign, or if you're running a genocide like Israel is you destroy a society's ability to survive. You make the land uninhabitable. You make the society uninhabitable. So we've seen them deliberately targeting certain demographics to make Gazan society, to make the land of Gaza uninhabitable in order to further that ethnic cleansing campaign.
I try to be a good Christian. I'm not always good at it, but I try. And as such, I have a fierce and passionate love for Judaism as a religious faith and belief. I mean, it's the root of everything that I live for. And this whole thing impacts me personally in a way that other conflicts have not, because I think it has moved beyond just mistakes or even greed or wicked intentions of those who are responsible into something that is satanic. And it's being essentially done in the name of God when you get right down to it. And it takes it to a new level that we really haven't seen. I mean, just to give you an example, back in the early 1980s, when Ronald Reagan was attempting to destabilize the Sandinista government in Nicaragua, there were many concerns that the proxies that he was using would be eventually replaced by U.S. troops, and that there would be a full-scale invasion of Nicaragua. And to head that off, progressive and right-thinking people in the U.S., good people, decided that what they would do is that they would place their bodies in between the U.S. military and the people of Nicaragua. And so there were delegations that were and groups of people who were flowing into Nicaragua, in and out, on a constant basis, so that if ever Reagan and et al. Ever thought about the idea of actually invading, that the cost of it would be the deaths of many U.S. citizens who were present in the country. And I think we're able to see in retrospect that was effective, that the U.S. government could never bring itself, I think, as badly as they wanted to take the Sandinistas out, to launch a full-scale military invasion, because they knew that U.S. civilians were in that country. And we've got a situation now where they just don't care. It does not matter that these are innocent civilians, that these are people who are there for purposes of saving lives. Everybody's got to die. if they are not on board with the program of genocide. And that is a level of evil that I think in many ways is just I won't say it's unprecedented, but it is certainly unusual.
Well, you know what? Let me bring, which leads us to how this can all stop. One of the great minds and thought leaders of our time from the Institute for Policy Studies, Phyllis Bennis. As I was talking with Reverend Jackson this morning about what I wanted to talk about, he said, don't do anything unless you talk to Phyllis. When was the last time you talked to her about this? And since the beginning, Phyllis Bennis saw where this was going and said, we've got to stop this. And at every critical turn, you always pivot to how we can stop this. What must we do to stop this? I mean, because now you've got Ralph Nader who's saying that there has been a horrific undercounting of the deaths. As you said, Matthew Ho, when people go there, they say they smell the stench of death because there's so many people underneath the rubble. You don't know who's there. Their estimates from other people who do these things say it could be more than 200,000 people who've been killed, which, I mean, it's just 30,000, 200,000, one person. It's all too much, but it has been horrific. How do we stop this? What must be done now, Phyllis Bennis, to stop this genocide?
Thank you, and send my hugs and my love to your father. You know, this is such a hard moment because the things that we know are necessary are all the things we've been doing. There has been an extraordinary movement that has grown up spontaneously in opposition to this genocide, and specifically in opposition to the US, not just complicity, but the US enabling, the US funding, the US arming of this genocide. The Biden administration is not only complicit, they are, in my view, responsible for this genocide and need to be held accountable. But before accountability, it has to stop because people are dying by the hour. We don't have time to do all the things that we could stand back and say, well, we need to do this. What has to happen is that the kind of pressure that we saw in the last several days brought by the Biden administration against the Netanyahu administration to say, you have got to open some new gates, you've got to let in more aid. What a surprise. Suddenly that worked to a very small degree because there was an implicit, not even an explicit, but an implicit potential, possible, maybe kind of sense that there could be some consequences if the Israeli position continued to simply say, no, we're not going to do anything that you're telling us. The amount of food, the amount of medicine, the amount of water, the amount of electricity, the amount of fuel, the amount of medicine that is desperately needed right this minute to stop the escalation of death is more than we can imagine. People talk about how during the, quote, regular siege that Gaza was under since the last 17 years, during the regular siege, about 500 trucks a day managed to get into the besieged strip. And it prevented people from facing starvation. It did not prevent children from being stunted by the lack of decent food that they required to thrive. So there was food, but there wasn't enough milk, not enough protein, no fresh vegetables. So that 20% of the children of Gaza were stunted by the age of 2 years before this latest escalation and now genocide that Israel has been carrying out. So we have to be very clear about what's required. The efforts to send food by sea, the efforts to build a temporary pier, that's all useful in the moment that a few people will get something to eat. It is not the answer. It is a distraction. What has to happen is an end to the siege and a ceasefire so that there is no bombing of the aid when it goes in. We don't hear what the potential consequences are of things like the airdrops. The U.S. made a big deal after cutting all of its funding to UNRWA, by far the most important of the aid institutions that has provided for, since 1949, has provided for Palestine refugees all the basics of access to food, water, medicine, but also education, also housing, also jobs, all the things that are required for life, because these were people living under military occupation since that time. So what we're looking at was an effort to say, well, we're going to cut the funding because Israel made some allegation. What a surprise, made the allegation about supposedly 12 staff members from UNRWA out of 13,000. Santita, think of that. 13,000 staff members of UNRWA work inside Gaza. 99% of them are Palestinians. They're not internationals, they're Palestinians who do all of that work. The engineers, the doctors, the nurses, the drivers, the street cleaners, all of that are all funneled through support by UNRWA. And within hours, it was about 3 hours after the International Court of Justice announced their finding, their ruling, that Israel is plausibly committing genocide or moving towards the commission of genocide. Israel suddenly announced to the world this allegation without evidence. And within another just couple of hours, the US, the same day, announced, oh, we're going to what? We're going to cut our entire budget, our entire funding of UNRWA so that it cannot function. UNRWA also is the only agency in the international arena that has a mandate supporting the Palestinian right of return. Without UNRWA, there is no one to defend that right, which is guaranteed in international law, but has never been implemented and has never been allowed to be realized by Palestinian refugees. So what we're looking at now is an attempt to distract. So the US says, well, we're going to send parachutes of food. It's as if they forgot what happened when they did that in Afghanistan. Starting 3 weeks after the US attacked Kabul, just 3 weeks after the 9/11 attacks, instead of treating that as a horrific crime, treating it as an act of war, going to war against a country from which none of the hijackers came. And the US realized that when they were bombing Kabul, bombing Kandahar, refugees were fleeing the city, carrying their children in their arms with nothing, with no food, no water, no warm clothes. And within a week, winter hit. And Afghan winters are bitter. And the US realized this was a really bad look, that we're driving people to die of starvation or die of frostbite. So they said, well, we're going to send food. We'll drop it by planes. And all of the experts said, no, don't do that. It's too dangerous. You can't get enough food in. You have to do it the old-fashioned way, send trucks to the mountains and donkeys up. So what did they do? They said, no, we're going to send these planes. We're going to drop it by helicopters and parachutes. And at the same time, they wrapped it in this brightly colored yellow tape, yellow plastic tape, so they'd be very visible when they were dropped. And at the same time, they were dropping cluster bombs, wrapped in the identical color, bright yellow plastic tape, so that children would run for the bright yellow packages thinking it was food, and it turned out to be cluster bombs. And children were being killed. This was under the regime of the then Secretary of Defense and now dead war criminal, Donald Rumsfeld. And that lesson was never learned. The same thing happened this time. 5 people were killed when a parachute didn't open and the food dropped on their heads. 12 people drowned when one of the parachutes went into the ocean, and people desperate for food for their families swam out to get the food, and 12 of them drowned. So that's what we're looking at. We need to change our government's position. And I would just say in this, Santita, a lot of people are asking this question. We're facing an election, and a lot of people are saying, and I don't think it's wrong, that a second Trump administration would be even worse in the treatment of Palestinians. Whether that's true or not, what we know is true is that the administration right now, this is not an election issue. This is an issue of morality. This is an issue of humanity. This administration is responsible for a genocide. And people are still saying, how do we get people to say they'll still vote for this because the option could be worse? That's the wrong question. The question we have to ask is the question you opened with. What else can we do to make sure this administration, through Congress, through city council resolutions, through all these means, what do we have to do to make the Biden administration and Biden himself change his position on this? He's changed it little bits and pieces in recent days because of the killing of white Westerners. Let's be clear, those 6 internationals who were among the 7 that were killed from the World Central Kitchen, they are indeed victims and heroes both, as are the 200, and I think it's up to 15 now, 215 other humanitarian aid workers. Overwhelmingly, they are Palestinians. And we did not hear that kind of shifting around, that kind of urgency, that kind of anger from Joe Biden, from the people around him, that we heard from the internationals who were killed. So we have to use that. We have to use that outrage and push it further to say that it is an outrage that all of these 33,000 Palestinians, 14,500 of them children, are being killed under bombs built in the United States, sent by our tax money. This is something that has to stop. So the question we have to ask continuously, what else can we do? What else do we have to do? This is not about the election. This is about stopping the policy now. You know, we just heard that the Israelis are now pulling out some troops from southern Gaza because they need a rest. They've been working so hard at killing people for 4 months. They need a rest. But we're not done here. They're very clear about that. We're going back to Rafah, where there are now 1.4 million Palestinians trying to find shelter where there is no shelter, camping on the beach, living without water, without sanitation, without toilets, without food, without anything. And we just heard that Israel has asked for tenders for their Ministry of Defense for 40,000 12-person tents. That's almost 500,000 people they're looking to move somewhere. Have they convinced the Egyptians to agree to accept a large number of refugees? Maybe. The Egyptians so far publicly have said no, because the Palestinians have a right to return, to live in their own land. Has the U.S. been able to provide enough money to Egypt to buy them off? Maybe. We don't know that yet, but it's not impossible. It's not impossible. So we have to be working on all these arenas, exposing what is happening in the quiet, in the dark. The day of the attack on the World Central Kitchen, when those 7 were killed by Israeli bombs aimed at 1, 2, and then 3 of their armored cars, the same day, the Biden administration agreed to send thousands more bombs to Israel. Thousands, hundreds of millions of dollars worth of new weapons. The same day. So let's not be fooled by the tears, the sorrow. I have no doubt that it's real at the human level, but it's completely irrelevant. Whether Joe Biden is angry or upset or distraught or crying, none of that matters, whether it's real or not. None of it matters. What matters is what he does. And when he's going around Congress, either by saying that these were old, formerly approved sales from years ago, obviously when the conditions were very, very different, or whether it's a small enough amount in each separate packet so that they're not obligated to go to Congress, but collectively it all requires congressional approval. No matter what those tricks are, they've got to stop. And we have to expose them that this is what the real policy of the Biden administration looks like. The language is changing. That's a good thing because it empowers others, the brave people who have resigned from the State Department, from the Department of Education, to protest these policies. It makes all of that possible. But we have a lot of work to do to change that policy here in Washington.
We have a lot of work to do, Mark Fancher, in about 90 seconds.
Yeah, no, I think that one thing we have to do is not think that we can solve this just in the United States. This is an outlaw empire, not just Israel, but it's Israel, the United States, certain Western forces and powers, multinational corporations and others. And it's necessary for there to be a mobilization of world opinion against this, a resolve by the planet to rid the planet of such an evil force. It's been done before. The world mobilized against Nazi Germany. The world mobilized against South African apartheid. It can be done again. And I think the great, wonderful irony is that South Africa filed the charges against the Israeli government in the International Court of Justice. Some might write that off as being of no particular significance since they don't have enforcement power. But it's a profound thing, because if the International Court of Justice rules that this is a genocide and that it is illegal and all of that, all bets are off at that point. Whatever is done internally or externally to try and stop it is now fair game. It won't be as easy to brand those who engage in resistance to this as terrorists. These are people who are trying to stop a genocide at this point. And I think that the critical effort is going to have to come from within Israel itself. There has to emerge a very militant movement within Israel to cause a crumbling from the inside. And then I think also externally, there has to be a great deal of aggressive militant action against the empire to bring it down. Once we have coordinated that, mobilized it around the world, then I think that we can bring this to a conclusion.
Matthew Ho, before you leave with this international effort to give relief to the Palestinian people, what would you like to say?
Well, one of the things with the Freedom Flotilla Coalition, with the International Civilian Aid Flotilla, is that we, again, are not complying or coordinating with the Israelis. So a lot of our cargo, our material that the Israelis will not allow in otherwise, including medical supplies and drugs. So things like medical scissors or anesthesia, which Israel will not allow into Israel, it is our intent to get those sorts of things into Gaza. I will say people should take the clip of what Phyllis just said and send that to people who do not understand the context of what is occurring here. I would encourage people to follow Mark's lead and to normalize the use of the word empire, because if we do not understand what the problem is, we do not understand the reality of the situation, that this is a story of empire, we can never ever resolve it. I'll also say two more things. Keep up the political pressure. It may not be working as fast as any of us want it to, but it is working. Every time Joe Biden or Kamala Harris show up at a campaign stop, they are confronted by protesters who often disrupt their speeches. That may not get on CNN or MSNBC, but it gets on local news, and it is terrorizing the Biden reelection campaign right now. People need to keep that up. And the other thing I'll say is support media like Santita. Look, if Gallup had a poll out a week and a half, 2 weeks ago, 55% of Americans are opposed to Israeli military operations in Gaza. That's the way they phrased it, 55%. If 55% of Americans are opposed to what Israel is doing, with the corporate media, as well as almost all of our politicians, essentially just parroting Israeli lobby talking points, just providing that constant barrage of a pro-Israel narrative, and 55% of Americans are still opposed to what Israel's doing, that shows what independent media can do in this country. And so I encourage people to support Santita and other forms of, other folks just like her who are doing, God's work in letting people know what the empire is doing overseas.
And we shall overcome. Phyllis Bennis, the last 30 seconds belong to you.
I agree with everything that Matthew and Mark have said. I would just add to that, this is a moment when there is a unified global position against this. We don't have to build that. That exists. Our work, though, I would assert, is the most important component of that. The other countries, Germany and others that are still continuing to send weapons, etc., they are relying on the US position to justify that to their own corporations and to their own governments. That's what has to change. It's going to have to change here in Washington with the support of the world, as was true in South Africa. That's part of the reason that the ICJ movement was so important, that it was the South African government that brought that said that people of the global South can reclaim these institutions that were in the past always controlled by the nations of colonial power, that's no longer the case. And even though they don't have the power to enforce those enforceable rulings that they have issued, it does provide a model, just the way the General Assembly resolutions in the United Nations, for years, that's where the resolutions against South African apartheid were passed. And even though they were not enforceable, they became the model. That was a tool for the global anti-apartheid movement to hold up that changed all the other governments around the world first. And finally, the United States had no choice but to give in, impose its own sanctions. They were, of course, vetoed by Reagan, but then the veto was overturned by Congress. And finally, the US was on the right side of history for that one brief moment on that one issue. And that was huge. That took a global movement. We've got that movement now. We have to use it. We have to use it because it's what happens here that's going to determine life or death for so many people in Gaza.
Amen to that. How can we get in touch with the Freedom Flotilla, Matthew Ho?
Simplest way is to Google Freedom Flotilla Coalition or Google the American contingent U.S. boats to Gaza. You'll find the website and there'll be contact information on there.
Before you go, you got to come back on the show. Attorney Mark Fancher, sending you so much love. Institute for Policy Studies, Phyllis Bennis, all of you, my heart is with you. And I thank you for all of your work. You're all doing God's work. And I salute the divinity in you as we have watched God's work with this eclipse today. We can do this, everybody. The right world is but a thought away. We can make it happen. We can make it happen. And we must. Stay tuned for the second hour. More of this discussion on the Santita Jackson Show here on AM 950 Radio, the voice of progressive Minnesota.